everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for coming out tonight to Darien Library. I'd like to mention that programs at the library are made possible by our annual Friends of the Library campaign, so thank you for your continued support to make our programs and collections available to the community. Tonight is the second presentation in a new partnership we have with Northern Trust Bank, and it's a very exciting partnership in which we bring engaging, interesting, intriguing speakers to the library. And it is co-sponsored by Northern Trust, and we thank them very much. And with that, I would like to introduce my friend Kirk Koehler, Senior Vice President at Northern Trust Bank.
Thank you, Erin. I have to read from notes because apparently the Darien Library doesn't have teleprompters yet. So, again, you know, Erin, the way you guys handle these things is really without peer. It's great to work with the Darien Library. It's unbelievable how they put on these programs. And I was telling Erin earlier how I watched the website, and it keeps getting backfilled with great programs. It's wonderful. So it's great to have all of you here. And we at Northern Trust are extremely excited to continue our partnership with the Darien Library. As Erin said, my name is Kirk Koehler. I'm a Senior Vice President at Northern Trust. What really brought us together, I'm going to make this as brief as possible, is our values, our goals, our commitment to the community are much the same. The commonalities that we have are that we have an absolute commitment to exceptional service to our clients or patrons at every turn. We invest in and cultivate our people to be exceptional providers and advisors and guides to the clients and patrons who put our trust in us. We understand the value of and we invest in technology to bring to our clients and patrons the most relevant and timely information and services efficiently and quickly. In the library's case, very efficiently. We understand deeply the importance of supporting our community as a whole, as well as the unique desires and needs of each individual in the community. So some of you may know who we are, who Northern Trust is. Some of you may not. Just very briefly, we're a 122-year-old trust bank. We have a heritage and a culture of fiduciary standards in everything we do. There are a lot of things we don't do as a bank, including credit cards, subprime mortgages, collateralized debt obligations, things like that. What we really do is we help families preserve, grow, and transfer wealth. That's our main focus. And again, it's been 122 years. We've never merged with anybody. Nobody's bought us. We've never bought any. We've made some strategic acquisitions along the way, but we haven't merged with anybody. And if you'd like to know more, we're always pleased to talk about it. It's a great story. You can call us anytime. Our office in Connecticut is in Greenwich. I've got some stuff out there, and so you can find us. I want to introduce to my colleague Barbara McCarthy, who is a financial consultant with us. Very valuable resource, and since she and I are the only ones here from Northern Trust, I can safely say that we are the brains of the operation. All right, Barbara?
Yes, absolutely.
Now I have the distinct pleasure of telling you a bit about the Nature Conservancy, the real important aspect of this evening. Their mission is to preserve the plants, animals, and natural communities that represent the diversity of life on Earth by protecting the lands and waters they need to survive. Some interesting facts: they work in all 50 states and in over 30 countries in the world. They are the largest conservation nonprofit organization in the world. They have nearly $6 billion in assets and 1 million supporters. The work of the Conservancy here in the Long Island Sound is part of the Global Marine Program, addressing the world's most urgent and critical needs to preserve and restore the ocean habitat. As most of you, if not all of you, know, the oceans cover 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by ocean, and the oceans support nearly half of all species on Earth. So they're obviously a very vital part to our planet. The Nature Conservancy currently has 200 different marine projects in 25 countries and in every single one of our coastal states. And it spends about $40 million annually on marine conservation. The Nature Conservancy's success, obviously, is critical to this planet, and I think all of us appreciate enormously the contribution they make and the work they do to continue helping our planet, our very fragile planet. I invite you to speak with Marie or Jill. Marie and Jill are over there. They're both part of the Nature Conservancy. Correct me if I'm wrong, Marie, you're the Director of Philanthropy, and Jill works directly with Marie, who is the Associate Deputy Chief Director of Philanthropy. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Chantelle Collier. Chantelle is the director of the Nature Conservancy's Long Island Sound program. After I tell you a little bit about her, I'm sure you'll be as pleased as I am that she's here to lead the Conservancy's efforts to protect our very own part of the world's critical ocean habitat right in our backyard. Chantelle spent many of her childhood summers on the shores of Connecticut and Long Island and is thrilled to be back here after stints working on marine conservation in California and Florida. Before joining the Nature Conservancy last November, Chantelle managed the Florida Department of Environmental Protection's Coral Reef Conservation Program, where she led the implementation of the Southeast Florida Coral Reef Initiative and represented the state of Florida on the U.S. Coral Reef Task Force. In earlier work with the California Coastkeeper Alliance, the Channel Islands National Park, and the Catalina Island Conservancy, Chantelle led a regional kelp forest restoration program and conducted several marine resource monitoring and research projects. I already feel like an underachiever, but there's more. She's maintained marine collections and taught scientific research diving at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, investigated queen conch reproductive patterns and coral spawning as a research fellow at the Caribbean Marine Research Center in the Bahamas, and was instrumental in all phases of program development and management of the UCLA Ocean Discovery Center, a public hands-on teaching aquarium in Santa Monica, California. She's a certified scuba diving instructor and scientific research diver. She also served as the Miami Unit Diving Safety Officer for the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, where she oversaw coral reef damage assessments, habitat monitoring, and data collection for a variety of projects and resource injury cases in Southeast Florida. So with that, and with the intense feeling of underachievement on my part, or a boring life at the very least, I'm pleased to introduce Chantelle Collier from Nature.
Well, that's quite an introduction. Thank you very much, Kurt. And good evening, everybody. It's an honor for me to be here, to be back in Connecticut, to be back in the New York, Connecticut area overall. As Kurt mentioned, I grew up here, so it's coming back to family for me, and it's coming back to the place that inspired me to pursue a career in marine conservation. So very honored to be here tonight to speak with you about Long Island Sound, a place that's near and dear to my heart, and I'm sure to many of you as well. So thank you very much. So tonight I'm going to be talking a little bit about how Long Island Sound and the health of Long Island Sound is connected to our quality of life. And the pictures that you see here just on my title opening slide give you some ideas of what we're talking about, things that we're familiar with. And these are all places in Long Island Sound on the top here that are examples of the beautiful elements of nature that make up the sound ecosystem. And in the pictures that are down below are some of the ways that we enjoy and benefit from the value of Long Island Sound and how it contributes to our way of life, whether it be choosing the places that we live, to be near the coast, where we do our business, where we recreate and play and enjoy and raise our families, to the seafood that we eat, and just taking a day out to spend some time at the beach. So these are many familiar scenes to all of us, and they have a much deeper meaning when it comes to the value of Long Island Sound, and we're going to get into that in a little bit more detail today. So I'm sure most of you are already familiar with where we are, but just to put things into context and to really think about how unique this body of water is, this is Long Island Sound right here. And what is Long Island Sound? It's an estuary. It's an estuary of the Atlantic Ocean. And it's situated between a very, very populated area comprised of the state of Connecticut, where we are now, its shores to the north, the city of New York to the west, and then Long Island, New York, to the south. And within this region, over 21 million people live within 50 miles of Long Island Sound's coastline. So that's a lot of people. It's a heavily populated, very developed area. So as I said, Long Island Sound is an estuary. But what is an estuary? Any hands in the audience? What's an estuary? Yes?
Where fresh water from the rivers and the streams feed into the oceans, which is salt.
Exactly,
So it's a
very good.
combination of fresh and salt.
Great, you got it. Exactly that. So an estuary is a partially enclosed coastal body of water fed by one or more rivers with an open connection to the sea. And it's influenced by the tides, but also sheltered from oceanic winds and waves. The inflow of fresh and salt waters creates a very unique, nutrient-rich environment that can be one of the most productive environments on Earth. And this habitat supports, through feeding, breeding, and nursery area, many different species of fish, shellfish, and other animals such as invertebrates and marine mammals. And Long Island Sound, looks like we have a little typo there. Long Island Sound is an estuary of national importance. It's been designated under the National Estuary Program as an estuary of national importance. So it's a very special place. It's been recognized by our country as well as the people who live in the area as being important. Okay. It looks like there might be a little bit of a disconnect between my computer and the computer that I'm using today, which is not mine. Some things have been rearranged here a little bit, so I apologize for that, but hopefully you can still follow along without any trouble. So let's take a look at Long Island Sound at a glance. The area of the sound is over 1,300 square miles, so it's a huge body of water. For an estuary, it's on the larger side. Many are much smaller. The area of drainage, or that fresh water that flows into the sound, covers over 16,000 square miles, and a majority of the freshwater inputs to the sound come from just 3 rivers, the Housatonic, the Connecticut, and the Thames. The average depth of the sound is about 63 feet, but at its deepest end, near the east where it meets the Atlantic Ocean, is up to 300 feet deep, so it's very diverse habitat. It covers 600 miles of coastline from shore to shore, and it has a wide range of environmental conditions, from temperatures that go from near freezing in the winter to low 70s in the summer, and salinities that span the range of 23 parts per thousand at the western end near New York City to 33 parts per thousand, which is typical of ocean waters near the eastern end where it meets the Atlantic. It experiences 2 high and 2 low tides per day and is home to over 170 species of fish and over 1,200 species of invertebrates. It also sees a lot of tropical species coming up because of its proximity to the Gulf Stream, and about 21 species of tropical animals have been documented in Long Island Sound at different times. And over 50 species of invertebrates and fish spawn within Long Island Sound. So it's a very important place for the life cycle of many animals that visit here and or live here. It supports a rich diversity of life. Plants, algae are a couple of the things that we have here, but we also have a huge range of invertebrates, and as I mentioned, fish, but also reptiles, seabirds, and marine mammals. And all of these animals and plants and algae exist within equally diverse habitats. Everything from salt marshes and tidal wetlands to seagrass meadows to natural shorelines and dunes, shellfish reefs, rocky reefs, the intertidal communities, and also different communities on the seafloor that range from sandy bottoms to silt and mud to gravel and boulder fields. And of course there's the open water as well, the pelagic environment, which is a unique habitat in and of itself. So the diversity in sound is tremendous. You have all sorts of critters, from open water mola molas, the ocean sunfish, to visiting marine reptiles. We have 5 species of sea turtles that come to the sound at different times of the year. We have moon jellies, we have seahorses, sea spiders, we even have coral, 1 species of coral, which is kind of a surprise to many folks. And so Why is Long Island Sound important? Is it just about the animals, or is there more to it than that? And certainly the ecology of the sound is important, but our way of life, the ecology, the economy, and the social benefits that we have now are largely connected to and depend on the ecosystem services that we receive from Long Island Sound. So what do we mean by ecosystem services? What are ecosystem services? It's a little bit of a technical term that you hear a lot in scientific and conservation circles, but it's a really important term to understand because it impacts our life every day, whether we realize it or not. Essentially, ecosystem services are the benefits that we receive from nature. In the marine environment, these are often complex and not well understood. As Kurt mentioned, 70% of the Earth is covered by the ocean, and 30% of the people on our planet live within coastal environments. But no matter where we live on the Earth's surface, we all depend on the ocean for survival, for our well-being, for the food that we eat, for the oxygen that we breathe. So let's take a closer look at some of these marine ecosystem services. As I mentioned, the ocean regulates our climate. So again, no matter where you live, we depend on the ocean. 70% of the oxygen that we breathe that's in our atmosphere is generated by marine plants and algae. About 30% of the carbon that's emitted into the environment is taken up by the ocean. Over 1 billion people worldwide depend on fish as their main source of protein. And fisheries and associated industries employ 38 million people worldwide directly and another 162 million people indirectly. So the ocean provides us also with recreational, educational, cultural, and aesthetic benefits. Those are the ones I think we typically are most often associated with. But there are also many new and exciting uses of the ocean, such as compounds that are being used from marine plants and animals to create new medicinal purposes, whether it be testing pharmaceuticals, using the blood of horseshoe crabs, for example, or grafting bone by using corals and compounds that can be derived from corals, or even combating cancer from chemicals that are found in the defense mechanisms of marine sponges. Many of these animals don't need to be harvested in great quantities to be able to benefit from the resources that they provide that don't exist anywhere else in the world. And of course, shipping, something we're also pretty familiar with, accounts for about 90% of global trade. So even when we're not depending on the resources within the ocean directly, the ocean is used as a mode of transportation and has been for many, many centuries. So let's take a closer look at some of the different habitats within Long Island Sound and how do they directly provide marine ecosystem services to us. Tidal wetlands and salt marshes are a great example. We're going to take a look at 5 habitats. And this is one that we're probably most familiar with because we see it regularly above the water line. This is a transitional area that's dominated by rooted, salt-tolerant plants. And these plants can trap sediments and reduce erosion of our coastline. They also reduce wave energy and provide a buffer from storms. And they support 2/3 of marine species in different stages of their life. Beaches and dunes are another habitat that we're very familiar with. They can be comprised of sand or cobble areas, and again, between dry and submerged land areas. They're very dynamic. They're continually shaped by the world around them. They're shaped by the tides, the currents, wind, and constantly eroding and depositing resources. They provide an incredibly unique habitat for nesting and foraging for different bird species, for arthropods like horseshoe crabs, for mollusks and crustaceans. And dunes and dune plants also provide tremendous protection from coastal flooding as well. What about seagrass meadows, moving below the surface? This is a habitat that some of you might be familiar with, but perhaps many of you haven't had much direct experience with. Eelgrass meadows are actually one of my first memories in Long Island Sound. This is where I really fell in love with the ocean. I would just spend hours snorkeling, floating over the eelgrass meadows right off the beach near our house in Connecticut. And just, it's magical just to watch the way that the leaves move within the shifting surge of the waves. And those leaves, though, provide many important services to us. They help dampen that wave action, and they can also trap sediments, similar in the way that salt marshes can, perhaps not to as great of an extent, but they also, because they are true flowering plants, have roots, and their rhizomes can also trap sediments and reduce erosion. They extract nitrogen from the water column, which helps to improve water quality. And again, they provide an incredibly important nursery area and shelter for juvenile fish, lobster, shrimp, and bay scallops, which are all found within our eelgrass beds. They're also a food source for many birds, and they trap 15% of the ocean's carbon capacity. Many areas, however, of southern New England's eelgrass beds have been lost. It's not showing up on the slide anymore, I guess because of that technical transport issue between computers, but we've lost over 50% of our eelgrass beds in many areas, and that's astounding. That's just since the 1930s. So we've really seen some changes in the environment and the quality and quantity of the resources that we've depended on. What about shellfish? Shellfish are another one that you're probably very familiar with on the dinner plate, but what do shellfish do for us in the environment besides provide a source of food? Well, many things. They support an important fishery, as we know, that provides not only food, but also many jobs. And they were once a dominant structural and ecological feature in our coastal waters and bays, the same places, as it happens, where people like to settle and do commerce. And their proximity of shellfish to human populations, unfortunately, also makes them very easily exploitable as a resource. Shellfish create intertidal and shallow coastal reefs and beds. They're built by clusters of oysters and mussels on soft seafloors. In many ways, they're often characterized as the temperate equivalent of coral reefs because they provide a habitat for other animals as well, and because they build a structure. They're living organisms that build a structure. They're engineers. They stabilize shorelines, reducing wave energy and erosion. Again, they provide coastal defense from storms and sea level rise. So all these different habitats offshore and along the shore provide a tremendous sense of true security for our resources and our communities. They provide shelter and food for numerous other animals, for finfish, for other invertebrates, and again for birds. And again, they also help improve water quality. They filter water. So they remove nutrients and algae and particulates from the water, and they also improve clarity of the water. They reduce the likelihood of harmful algal blooms and hypoxia, which have been a big problem in the Sound, especially in the western end. And they support other species, such as eelgrass, because of that improvement to water quality that they bring. Unfortunately, despite increasing recognition of all these ecosystem services that they provide, management objectives for moving beyond harvest are still not widespread. What about the open water? An area that's farthest from shore. If you're a boater, sailor, if you travel across the Sound on the ferry, you've likely spent time on the open ocean and thinking about the open ocean and perhaps looking to see what you might see. It's an incredibly diverse habitat as well. We think of it as perhaps being more barren. There's no structure, it's just open water. But wow, there's so much life in the open ocean. From microscopic plants and a number of different larval stages of bottom-dwelling animals, to larger fish and marine mammals and turtles, and everything in between, from jellyfish and squid to seabirds. And the open ocean serves many human uses, from shipping and transportation to a place where infrastructure is laid. There are all sorts of different cables running across the Sound, for example, providing transmission of energy and different materials across the Sound to support our human community infrastructure. The Sound and other areas of the open water are also used as a disposal area for dredged materials and for human waste. And they're also used for military activities. It's used for open ocean energy development. The ocean is being explored now for traditional uses of energy, for example, oil and gas exploration, to alternative sources such as wind and hydropower. And fisheries, of course, again, another very important theme. And tourism and recreation. We spend a lot of our time getting out on the water and just enjoying it in the open ocean. So what is the economic value of Long Island Sound's ecosystem services? We've talked a lot about the ecology, we've talked about some of the social benefits it received, and a little bit about the economic value, but what are some of the hard figures that we really can expect to see, and what do we depend on in terms of economic support from Long Island Sound? Well, there's not a lot of data, and this is an area that we probably need to explore further, and is something that's becoming more prevalent right now in marine science, is looking at the value of these ecosystem services, because they're important and they're valuable, not just for their intrinsic value, because they're there and they're beautiful and we should protect them, but because we actually derive tremendous benefit from them, and that translates to dollars, economy, and jobs. So Long Island Sound supports 30,000 maritime industry jobs in Connecticut alone. It also generates over $149 million a year from recreational fishing in both Connecticut and New York combined. And it generates $30 million in commercial finfish and shellfish landings in Connecticut alone. And for every 2.5 acres of coastal wetlands, $28,500 in storm-related damages are prevented each year. And the one bullet that's, of course, behind my pictures right now is the most important. That's the cumulative value of what we do know from the research that's been done. And that's that over almost $9 billion a year are generated for the economy of Connecticut and New York through the resources of Long Island Sound. That's huge. So how are ecosystem services damaged or lost, and why do we need to think about this and be concerned about it? Well, unsustainable patterns of production and consumption can lead to and have led to loss of both habitat and species, not just in Long Island Sound, but in our oceans and all of our environments around the world. In the ocean and in Long Island Sound, issues such as runoff and discharge of pollution are a huge problem. Fertilizers, pesticides, human and animal waste, industrial byproducts and waste, and medical waste disposal have either historically or are still today parts of the problem to what's threatening the sound and the ocean in general. Development pressure, 21 million people and growing in the region, has a huge impact on the environment around us. From urban sprawl to the loss of coastal wetlands and riparian forests along our streams and rivers, altered water flows from dams and channelization and dredging, to impervious surfaces like all the pavement in our driveways and the roads that don't allow for water to percolate through the surface and instead cause it to run off into our waterways, which eventually drain into the Sound and the ocean. These are all problems associated with development and the number of people in the region. Overharvesting can also be a problem, taking too many resources from the Sound, and recreational misuse and overuse, carelessness, dropping anchors on resources, running boats aground. It doesn't happen intentionally, but cumulatively, these kinds of impacts can cause a lot of damage. And of course, the introduction of non-native species, which again is often accidental, but is a byproduct of that global transportation system, as well as sometimes intentional and unintentional introductions by hobbyists, for example, who perhaps have an aquarium and accidentally or don't know what to do with a fish that's gotten too big, release it into an environment that's not its native habitat. It happens all the time. So, our way of life and Long Island Sound are inextricably linked. By 2025, projections estimate that the population in the United States that's living in coastal counties and townships is going to be 75% of our nation's population. We know we depend on healthy oceans for food, for jobs, for business, for energy, for security and recreation. To sustain these benefits, we have to protect and restore the ecosystem services we receive from Long Island Sound and all of our oceans. And to reverse the loss and degradation of these services, their ecological, social, and economic value have to be incorporated into routine land, coastal, and marine use decision making. So some of the things that we're doing at the Nature Conservancy to address these problems are important. We're looking at, for example, ways to improve decision making by developing tools and partnerships to help address how ocean space is used. There's a lot of competition for ocean space and how it's used, from transportation to energy exploration to dredging to recreational and traditional uses. How can we site and place where those activities occur in a way that's ecologically appropriate? Seagrass research and restoration. Well, we know that we've lost a lot of our seagrass beds. What can we do to make them healthy again, to allow them to come back? We're looking at the genetic diversity of seagrass in the region, and we're also looking at the effects of different stressors and how they impact seagrass communities. We're applying those results to promote enabling conditions and improving the environment to allow seagrass to come back as naturally as possible and do restoration and learn how to better do restoration where it's needed. And coastal resilience. We're also looking at ways to develop and promote policies and actions to help mitigate for climate change and the effects of sea level rise. But what can you do there are lots of ways that you can support a healthy Long Island Sound as well. You can get involved with your local watershed association, your local land trust, or conservation commission. At home, in your own garden, you can be careful about the use of things that may get into the water. The use of fertilizers and pesticides should happen only when needed, and be careful not to use products like those on your lawn when there's a rain forecast so that they don't wash off and become part of the runoff pollution problem. Clean up after your pets to keep animal waste out of the water. Dispose of trash properly to keep cigarettes and litter off the beaches, and enjoy wildlife, but don't disturb them or take souvenirs. You can also make an online contribution to support conservation work that's happening in Long Island Sound through TNC and other organizations that are doing great work in the area. And you can share what you know about the Sound with others. Probably one of the most important things we can do is to help people understand why these resources are so important to them and how we all benefit from their health and well-being. And with that, I thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them at this time. Yes, in the back.
Two questions. One, if you could comment on what's the evolution of the health of the Sound over the past 10, 15 years or so. And then two, I know there was some discussion of an LNG in the Sound, so if you know what the current status of that is.
Right. Yeah, those are two really good questions. So the first one is, how has the health of the Sound improved? And it has. There's been tremendous effort by many different partners in the region to improve many different aspects and reduce threats to the Sound. Back in, well, it's been a couple of decades now, because of that designation as an estuary of national importance, the federal EPA came into the region and led an initiative that many of you are probably very familiar with that's still underway and moving strongly forward with many partners engaged, and that's the Long Island Sound Study, which is working to reduce a lot of threats, especially from pollution sources. There's been a focus on improving water quality and improving infrastructure, updating sewage treatment facilities, looking at ways to reduce marine debris, actual litter in our waterways. So there are many efforts there. I don't have specific numbers with me today, but there have been tremendous improvements, and they are on track to meet a lot of the goals that they have established through the comprehensive management plan that's been put in place through that program. And many folks have gotten engaged, and I think awareness of the issues of the Sound and what's been threatening the health of the Sound have increased dramatically as a result of those efforts, and many partners in the region at the state, local, and federal level, as well as many other non-governmental organizations in the region, as well as academic institutions that are working to better understand what the threats are to the Sound and find ways to restore and mitigate those impacts. Towards your second question with the LNG terminal, that's the liquid natural gas facility, Broadwater, that was proposed in the region recently. And as I understand it, that is not happening at this point in time, but it's a great example of why something like coastal and marine spatial planning is important, because if you're going to propose a project like that, it's a new use for this region at least of the ocean, we need to think about where you would put something like this so that it's not damaging the environment. Liquid natural gas terminals are being proposed as offshore ports in many different areas. Where I just came from in Florida, there was a similar project proposed, and it didn't survive either for various reasons. But part of the problem is understanding how do we look at these needs to expand existing uses of our ocean in ways that don't harm the environment. And we don't always have a lot of the information that we need to make those decisions well. So it's important that we can step ahead of issues like that coming up, those types of projects, to make sure that we've put planning in place to allow us to make decisions ahead of time as opposed to having to react to a proposal when it's made. Yes, ma'am, here in the front.
Could you comment on the general health of salt marshes in the Sound, and if there's a difference west versus east? And are we learning about things, for instance, the Foghall River has really, over the last few years, the salt marsh grass has basically disappeared, and there never seems to be a good answer for that. Are there some answers coming out?
Yeah, actually, I don't have the information with me today, but we have some work. We've been supporting a student, actually, who's been doing some research on salt marshes in the Sound and trying to understand the impacts and the associations and the relationships really between urban development in the region, fishing pressure, and also the presence of a crab, Sasarma, that eats salt marsh plants, and what its effect is on those plants in association with the amount of fishing pressure and coastal development that has changed populations and basically the trophic dynamics, who eats who, within Long Island Sound. So I don't have all of that information today. The work is being completed right now, but we will have a report coming out soon, and that's research that we've been supporting through TNC with support from one of our donors to better understand. So hopefully we'll have some answers on that very soon. Yes, sir.
I was going to ask the same question, but I have a further question to do with that subject. Is that anything to do with the rising of the sea level or the lowering of the land level that might be affecting the salt marsh practice?
Well, that is actually something really important, and I mentioned the coastal resilience work that we're doing. We have a tool that's been developed that's available on our website. It's called the Coastal Resilience Tool, that actually allows us to look at different sea level projections and see how that's going to impact our coastal environments. And one of the really interesting aspects of it is looking at where there's a potential for salt marshes to migrate upshore if they're given space to do that. And as we see, and we just spoke about, there are tremendous benefits from storm buffering, as well as the ecological benefits that we receive from those salt marshes. So looking for ways to enable that migration to occur as sea levels are changing is an important thing for us to consider. And that's something that anybody here can go online and take a look at if you're interested in looking at a particular area of the coast to see where salt marshes currently are, where they might be able to migrate, and where there are human structures in the way that would prevent their migration.
We can find that online?
Yes, at tnc.org, the Nature Conservancy website in our Long Island Sound program area. Yes, sir.
Hi, Chantelle. I work with the Friends of Norfolk Islands. It's a local group. And how does the Nature Conservancy work with local groups supporting, some of the things you do?
Well, the Long Island Sound program for TNC is relatively new. I just started in November, but that's one of my key areas of interest is partnering with other people. As I mentioned before, there's been a tremendous amount of work that's already been done in Long Island Sound. There are a lot of great groups that are focusing on things at the local level within a particular embayment or within a small part of the watershed. And so that's one of the things that we'd really like to do is explore how we can partner with people more. That's been a history of the Nature Conservancy and a lot of its work on land. And it's a big part of, I think, what allows us to maximize limited resources and share common goals and, work on a shared vision for the future of the Sound. So I'd love to learn more about your group and what they've been doing and what the focus areas are and see how we might be able to partner.
Get your information. I'll be in touch.
Great, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
There was a lobster die-off a couple of years ago. A lot of fishermen felt it was something to do with pesticides and the use of the West Nile virus mosquito. I don't know how that ever turned out or if there were ever any decisions made as to what caused that.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. I don't think it's really very well understood, and I think it's an area that we probably need to explore further. Certainly it's impacted the lobster fishery tremendously. There are still lobsters in the Sound, but yes, that has had a huge impact, as many others. I think, when we see these types of die-offs, it's often not any single issue or threat that has caused the problem. Often it's cumulative impacts from many different sources, and it's very difficult, I think, to tease out, one or two particular causes of decline. And so that's part of the challenge, is really looking at all the different issues and trying to understand that. I think in the back there in the red, yes.
Well, when I was growing up in Lloyd Neck, Long Island, not that long ago, we put out Clorox bottles and I caught lobsters and would row in our canoe out to the boats moored in Lloyd Harbor and sell them for 25 cents a pound.
Well,
We had clams we sold, some cheap we had. We never, no one ate mussels. They were considered so dirty. Very important. But at the same time, the Hudson was disgusting. And so now the Hudson's turned around, their product covers everything else. And so my question is, and I'm friends with Billy Dan, who's one of the big directors of the Nature Conservancy.
yes.
And so I understand the really big collaborative efforts that the Nature Conservancy So what is the model for Long Island Sound? It's such a special place. The Hudson's really different. Is there a model that Long Island Sound, model of success that your plans for Long Island?
A model of success that
A
what?
model of success somewhere else that Long Island Sound can sort of follow. Is it so unique? Is it always unique?
I think when you have to ask that question, you have to look at specific issues, and there are lots of examples, I think, around the world that we can use as models for how to do things differently here. Looking at other estuaries, certainly, and some of the successes that have been had, for example, with shellfish restoration in other parts of the world is something that we might want to think about here. I think one of the challenges that you have in many places, and Long Island Sound is no different, is the different entities that are involved in managing resources. And here in Long Island Sound, one of the obvious ones is that, it's split between two different states, and often there are different rules and regulations depending on which side of the state line you're on. So that makes some of those management issues a little bit more challenging. But I think there are lots of models out there that we can look to for specific species and habitats, and also overall approaches. And one of the things that you may be familiar with that the Nature Conservancy is focusing on right now is looking at larger issues and really looking at regional scale problems and looking at things from the view of a whole system. So, for example, we're looking at Long Island Sound also in relationship to its watershed, but beyond that, even looking at how it sits within the geography of southern New England. And so, for example, with our eelgrass project, we're not only focusing on eelgrass in the Sound, we're also looking at eelgrass up and down the Atlantic side of Long Island and all the way up to southern Cape Cod to better understand those impacts and identify where different populations occur and what are some of the differences that can help us understand why things are the way they are in the Sound relative to adjacent areas, and are there connectivity issues that we need to be looking at between different geographies as well.
Is there a difference in the attitude of the Connecticut and Long Island? The Long Island people used to say that it's all those filthy Connecticut rivers and the industry that dumps everything into, out pristine sands in Long Island. No, I think that's
Well, I think it probably depends who you talk to on any given day. I think everybody has their own perspective, and I think there are different issues. In as much as there are different government structures, there are also different community uses and needs. And the coast of Connecticut and the coast of Long Island, even though they're both on Long Island Sound, are quite different. So I think that's a big part of it as well. So I don't think it's as easy as just pointing at one or the other. Everybody might point west to New York City too. I don't know. I think everybody wants to always think, oh, well, it's them and it's not us. But I hope I was able to convey that what we each do as individuals is just as important as what we do at the community level or at the government management level. So I think it's really everybody's responsibility to take ownership of the resources that we depend on. See, somebody on this side of the room, gentleman in the back here.
You were talking about the different geological formations, I guess, between Long Island and Connecticut. One of the things that we in Greenwich, or I'm in Greenwich, and we looked at is whenever there's a significant storm, because of the fact it's basically a low, not much soil over rock, there's a significant flow off, that comes through Greenwich floods, and I assume there are other towns fairly kind of like that. Is that similar to Long Island, or does that create more of an issue for the Sound in terms of runoff and
Sure. Well, absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of different factors at play there. When you have flooding in an area, it has all sorts of impacts, and runoff certainly is going to be a part of that, because all that water is going to drain back out into the Sound when the water goes back down after a storm event. So yes, it's even worse, I think, after a big storm, because areas that wouldn't normally be as saturated become completely saturated, and eventually some of that will go back into the ground, but a lot of that will run off back into open waterways.
How does it revolve into the ocean? Or how does the Sound wash in and out? How does the salt water get purified, or the waves? How often is the water stuck in there, or is it
After a storm event or on a daily basis?
Or is the waves 2 days it washes through, or?
Well, I think it depends on the magnitude of a storm. I mean, we have as I mentioned earlier, there are 2 high and 2 low tides daily, so the water, just due to gravitational pull of the moon and the sun, is shifting on a daily basis. But that changes throughout the course of a month as well, depending on the cycles of the moon. So you have different levels. You have high tides, and you have lower high tides, and then you have low tides and low tides. And there's a variation in those tidal differences throughout the month. But then at different times of the year, you can get more extreme tides as well. So, those effects change monthly, seasonally, and daily. But when you have a storm, it's different, because then you've got extreme events that are bringing additional water into the area that's going far beyond tidal issues and creating surge from wind and waves that can push huge volumes of water onto the shore. And if there's nothing in the way of that, it's going to go into urban communities. If you have something like a salt marsh in front of the community, salt marshes have an ability, to a certain extent, to buffer some of that. They can actually absorb a lot of water, and they can store water during a storm event, as well as provide a physical barrier, a physical buffer to the onset of waves and surge that come with a storm. So having natural barriers to protect our coastal communities is actually a very important service that those areas provide. And similarly, a salt marsh, just to continue using the same example, can filter out a lot of the pollution that comes from return of those waters back into the ocean. Good questions. Lady in the purple sweatshirt here. Yes?
Oh, do you have any connection in both the 2 marine academies located in the Sound, the Kings Point United States Marine Academy or the Fort Schuyler?
No, not presently, no.
Because it seems to me they have, great ability to, they have ships that actually do certain kinds of things like that. Kind of a natural.
Yeah, well, thanks. I will look into it. As I mentioned, I'm just returning back to the area after being away for some time. So I'm definitely open to looking at new possibilities of who we can work with. Thank you for mentioning that.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Okay. Thank you, Erin. Yes, in the front here.
Can you talk a little bit about the water quality issue? I mean, obviously there's pesticides, you're talking about runoff, and how about litter? There are other groups that are working to raise awareness. How will the Nature Conservancy address things like litter, plastics in the ocean, things like that?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, there are a lot of other groups working. Oh, sorry, yes. The question was with regards to water quality. There are a lot of groups that are working on removal of marine debris, litter in particular. But there are other water quality issues as well that need to be addressed. And I think you're asking what the Nature Conservancy does in terms of water quality. Right. Well, right now we're really focusing more on enabling conditions and improving water quality at a regional scale. So we're looking more at the policy and legislative change side to support that. So that's where we'll be focusing our efforts. Good question. But beach cleanups are important too, and I love doing them. They're fun, and it's a hands-on. It's a great way to actually see change in a day. You can make a huge impact. Yes, sir, right here.
As director of the Long Island Sound program, is this a new initiative? What are its goals? How long do you think it will last?
Okay, good question. Well, it's actually been around for a few years. I'm not the first director, but I have just started recently. And so the core strategies that I mentioned to you that we're currently working on are things that have been underway for a few years now and have been successful programs that I'd like to see us continue. But one of the things I'm doing right now is getting out and meeting with partners in the region and getting myself back up to speed on all the good work that's been happening in the Sound to see where we can really maximize the efforts of others and enhance efforts that are already underway in the Sound. I think there's a wonderful shared vision that's already been articulated through all the partners that have been involved in working on sound issues through the Long Island Sound Study Citizens Advisory Committee. And that mission and vision has been in place now for 2 decades. I think what we would like to do is support a shared vision for the future health of the Sound. And so we're really looking at ways to collaborate with others to meet the goals that have already been established and vetted through many stakeholders in the region, as well as how we can contribute uniquely through our areas of expertise in TNC.
Where could we find the Long Island Sound Study?
Oh, it's there's a Long Island Sound Study website. If you just do a search for Long Island Sound Study, it'll come up right away. LISS. Yes. Do we have time for one more? Okay. I'm sorry. I'm not sure who had their hand up first. So let's go with this woman in the black hair.
I'm interested in working with local groups who are desperately fighting in Darien to stop stuff going into the sound, because we don't seem to be getting very far with the town of Darien. Even though I love Darien, one local man's been working on Goodwives River for 10 years, trying to get it dredged. And living on the river and the waterfall, I see what goes into the sound through Gordon's Pond. Would you be willing to?
Yes, I'm always interested in learning about what's going on within the community. There's so many different parts of the communities around the Sound that I want to learn more about. So yes, I'm absolutely interested in learning more and finding out if there are ways that we might be able to partner, certainly. So yes, please see me afterwards. I'd be delighted to hear more. Thank you. Okay, I think that's all of our time. Thank you so much. You've been a wonderful audience and great questions. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chantelle. It's comforting to know that we have you spearheading this, and it's comforting to know the Nature Conservancy is behind it. One of the things that struck me about the Nature Conservancy is their ability to partner with local, regional, state, federal agencies and groups to get done what they need to get done. It's not butting heads. It's really a cooperative effort. So if if you can find a way to help, please do. And it's always nice to see people here who do care. As a lifelong Connecticut resident and current Darien resident, it's comforting to know. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.